Yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize Mr. Veazey for his 5 minutes of questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Ms. Garza, I don't know the Koch brothers. I've never met them. I know that a lot of my Republican colleagues around the table have met them and dealt with them and been supported by them. And because of your work in the nonprofit world, you probably are familiar with Cato Institute and know that they founded that organization. And there is a very interesting report, if you haven't read it, that talks about this issue. 97% of ports are less likely to be stopped than are people illegally crossing between them. One of the reasons why we see people going to these ports is because they know that drugs are less likely to be searched there, and so it's only logical that these people that are bringing fentanyl in these countries would go through these ports. Just 0.2% of the people arrested by Border Patrol for crossing illegally possessed any fentanyl whatsoever. And contrary to what Mr. Judd just told us, we know that the government exacerbated the problem by banning most legal cross-border traffic in 2020 and 2021, accelerating the switch to fentanyl, and that during the travel restrictions, fentanyl seizures at ports quadrupled from fiscal year 2019 to 2021. Fentanyl went from a third of combined heroin and fentanyl seizures up to over 90%, and annual deaths from fentanyl doubled from 2019 until 2021 after the government banned most travel and asylum. So it's pretty logical and obvious where the drugs are coming from. And so I want to ask you, how has a militarized border affected these communities, especially knowing that the drugs aren't coming in through their communities? And I just want to say for the record, Mr. Chairman, I've been to the border many times and have visited McAllen for a variety of different reasons over the last 18 years. And this is probably one of the safest communities I've ever been in the entire state of Texas. I'm from Fort Worth. Please.
I want to start with the fact that I'm a fifth generation Tejana from Brownsville, Texas. And it is one of the safest communities. I'm raising my 10-month-old daughter here intentionally. It is not what is depicted in the media. This is not a war zone. It is a very safe community. It's a very welcoming community. And unfortunately, we are on the eve of some fiestas that are happening in Brownsville, the celebration of the relationship between Brownsville and Matamoros that is incredibly unique. It's a celebration of the relationship between the United States and Mexico, of our intertwined economies, of our families, of our culture, of our language. And to have a hearing like this that isn't focused on the needs of border communities, we need infrastructure. We need dollars for health care. We don't need a militarized zone. We have all kinds of enforcement in this region, and it has done nothing to stem the flow of drugs. Operation Lone Star has spent billions of dollars in this region, as I laid out in my testimony, and it has not resulted in reductions of deaths that you are seeing in your communities in the interior of the United States. So throwing more money into militarizing this region is not going to solve the problem. We need to address this as a public health issue, and we need to treat immigrants that are seeking protection in this country humanely. And we need to take care of that part, because the people in this community are stepping up. Even though they are impoverished, we are still standing up and helping out these folks that are coming and looking for protection in our country.
No, thank you. In Mr. Judd's opening statement, he made a comment that he didn't know exactly why the undocumented are coming here. And I would like to remind Mr. Judd and everybody sitting around this table, not just him, that the reason why they're coming here and the reason why they are here, they're primarily taking jobs that are very hard to fill in this country. And so all of us should remember that the next time we put food on our table, that food was probably picked or harvested or produced by people that were undocumented. The next time we put gas, we talk about Texas being the oil and gas capital of the world, the next time we put gas in our car. And so that's what they're doing. I just wanted to answer Mr. Judd's question, because he said that he did not know what they were doing here. And I'm telling you what they're doing here. We're all eating tonight because of them. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding back. Now recognize Mr. Latta for his 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this hearing, and thanks to our witnesses for being with us tonight. You know, one of the things I think is important to point out is that, you know, in some of the hearings that we've had, we're no longer hearing the words that we're having an overdose issue in this country, but we have a fentanyl poisoning problem in this country. And it wasn't very long ago at a roundtable that we conducted that a law enforcement officer said that those that are lacing narcotics with fentanyl are committing murder. So I think it's important to point out that, you know, we have to see that there's a massive change happening in this country because, again, it's already been pointed out, but I'm going to point it out again, that when you think of the 107,735 people that lost their lives in this country in 2021 alone, that over 70,000 of those are because of fentanyl. So I think it's really important that the legislation, the Halt Fentanyl Act that my friend, the chairman, and I have introduced is so important to get across the finish line because, again, it will permanently schedule fentanyl-related substances as a Schedule I drug and enable researchers to continue to study Schedule I substances for possible medical benefits. And I think it's also important to point out again that when the Drug Enforcement Agency's Associate Administrator for Business Operations, John DeLina, was before our committee, he stated that the Halt Fentanyl Act is the agency's top priority. And Mr. Judd, if I could start with you, why would Mr. DeLina say that the Halt Fentanyl Act would be the agency's top priority?
Because the amount of deaths that are occurring in the United States, it has to be the top priority if we're going to stem off the number of deaths. Again, 107,000 people died of overdose deaths in 2021 alone. That number went up. I believe it's about the exact same in 2022. We cannot continue to sustain that number of deaths in the United States.
Well, thank you. And, you know, again, some of us were able to visit the McAllen CBP facility before we came here this evening. And let me ask, what trends does CBP have identified in illicit drug shipments, and especially when you think about the international coordination on fentanyl analogs and counterfeit drugs coming in across our borders?
What we have noticed and what has become very, very clear is the cartels want to pull resources out of the field. And the way they do that is they flood specific areas with illegal border crossers. When they do that, it requires us to deploy those resources to that area. And when we deploy those resources, then you have wide gaps that are clearly open. And when you look at 1.2 million gotaways, if every single one of them, and I'm not saying that every single one of them, but if every single one of them was carrying a backpack of 90 pounds of drugs, that's an awful lot of drugs. And that is the scary aspect of this. We must be able to detect and apprehend everything that is crossing the border between the ports of entry. And once we do that, then we can evaluate where resources need to be placed. But until we do that, just throwing resources at an issue is putting the cart before the horse. That's why we have to have the proper policies, programs, and operations. Then we can look at what resources are necessary after that.
You know, something else that was brought up this afternoon when we were visiting, the question as to individuals that in the past might have had some cash on them that are now you're finding folks coming up that have no cash. And so the question then is, you know, what is the cartel out of their goodness of their heart allowing these people to go through their areas to bring them up here for free?
No, every person and everything that crosses the border illegally goes through the cartels. Whether you're paying fees on your way up through Mexico, whether you're paying a fee at the border, every single person or every single thing that crosses the border illegally, it is in the cartel's hands.
Well, and again, I think what you mentioned about the distracting of our Border Patrol by the cartel when they bring large groups of people up into one area is very, very important. And also, you know, one of the things, if I could just finish up with, is that, you know, the cartels are producing fentanyl-laced pills that cost about 10 cents a piece. So that means they're killing Americans for 10 cents. And that's something that, you know, we've got to stop. And I think this is one of the things that's so important for this committee and why we're here tonight. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to ask the witnesses, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back and now recognize Mr. Bilirakis for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair. In November, I had the opportunity to lead a delegation visit to the Arizona-Mexico border, having in-depth conversations, and I also brought some of my local sheriffs with me as well, but having in-depth conversations with the Border Patrol agents, custom agents, and again, local sheriffs, and also Mr. Judd. The resounding feedback I received was that our border is not secure, which continues to allow the surge of illegal drugs that have made every state a border state. Florida, like every other state, has seen stark upticks in fentanyl poisoning deaths. Without question, fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction. We are at war, ladies and gentlemen. Sheriff Martinez, when I visited the Arizona-Mexico border, I met with Sheriff Daniels, who described the United States southern border as a war zone governed by the Mexican cartels. You have provided similar testimony, sir, today. He also said that the large policy shifts from the Trump administration to the Biden administration have emboldened these cartels, and elaborated that these new policies have left those at the border out to dry. And I've heard this from residents here in Texas. Do you feel this is a fair assessment, sir?
Yes, sir, it is.
In your opinion, was the Remain in Mexico policy implemented under President Trump helpful?
Yes, sir, it was. That's the wall.
Thank you. Mr. Judd, again, it's wonderful to see you again. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
I greatly appreciate the role you played in helping coordinate the visit in November. The time you spent with the group was informative, and your frankness continues to be refreshing. I'd like to ask you similar questions as I did Sheriff Martinez. Do you agree with Sheriff Daniels' assessment that the southern border is a war zone?
I would agree that the southern border is controlled by criminal cartels, and large swaths they have complete control over.
Okay. Do you believe construction of the southern wall should be continued and completed, sir?
I know it should. All you have to do is look at history. In one of the stations that I was assigned to, pre-wall, we were apprehending 100,000 people. Post-wall, that dropped down to less than 10,000 people. We're able to dictate where illegal activity is taking place if we have infrastructure like physical barriers.
Oh, thank you very much. What other resources and technology do you and the 16,000 Border Patrol field agents need to protect our border from the influx of illicit fentanyl? Now, I know that you said we've got to change the policies, but can you elaborate on the resources that are needed once we change the policies, sir?
So we must retain Border Patrol agents. We can't do that right now. We're supposed to be at 21,370 agents, yet we're at 19,300. That is the resources that we have to be able to keep. If we don't have enough agents in the field, we can't do the job. CBP, they do an incredibly important job. The ports of entry are incredibly important, but they don't have an issue of retaining employees at the ports of entry. We have an issue with retaining employees between the ports of entry, and we must be able to retain our employees, and we can't do that right now.
Thank you, sir. Ultimately, this is a public health crisis. I agree with that. Mr. Archer, thanks for being here today to provide perspective of healthcare for the workforce trying to address the collision of illicit fentanyl and the mental health and substance use disorder concerns we face as a nation. How have the policies of the Biden administration negatively impacted your facilities, your staff, and ultimately patient care?
You know, I think as a behavioral health provider today, post-COVID, we are in an environment where, certain things have been extended during COVID, such as telemedicine flexibility, things that we're hoping are going to be made permanent in the near future. Workforce continues to be one of our major concerns. I know I've shared that numerous times with us tonight. It's what we wake up with day in, day night in this industry. And again, I'll just say, that behavioral health patients in the caregivers that I represent have not always had the strongest advocates. And so as we look at the power that managed care has and other organizations have, parity remains one of our major desires and needs for our industry.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding back. Now recognize our longest-serving pharmacist in the United States House, Buddy Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to jump right into it because I got a lot to go over in 5 minutes. I want to ask you, Mr. Judd, let's talk about this 97% of the fentanyl that is seized is at the border. Okay, I'll accept that. I'll accept that as being a fact. Okay, but it's my understanding that U.S. authorities estimate that we're only catching 5 to 10% that comes across. So if you're talking about 97% of 10%, you're still talking about a minuscule amount. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Let me ask you something else. We were at the processing center this afternoon, and I heard something that was very disturbing, and I need to get clarification on it. They told us that because fentanyl is an approved drug in America, that the dogs are not trained to sniff for it.
Certain precursors, that is true, but I have found that I used to be a canine handler myself. I have found that the dogs are in fact finding fentanyl. How that is, I don't know. I was a canine handler many years ago, but I do know that the canine just detected that in Sonora, Arizona 2 nights ago.
Well, I certainly hope that's not the case, because even though it is an approved drug, you got to have a prescription for it. I'm sure these people don't have a prescription for it when they're coming across the border.
No, they
Are
do
we
not.
checking to see if they got a prescription?
We check every document that they have, yes.
Well, I certainly hope that the Halt Fentanyl Act, once it's made permanent, that this will make sure that every dog is trained to detect fentanyl that's coming across that border. Let me ask you something else. If you had additional resources to put into border security, do you believe that more would be seized?
I believe that if we had more personnel on the border, absolutely. If we were able to deploy our agents to the field, yes, I absolutely believe that more would be seized.
I get so frustrated by this talk, and with all due respect, Mr. Archer and Ms. Garza, when you talk about opioid addiction, and when you talk about fentanyl poisoning, you're apples and oranges here. I could not agree more. We need to do something in this country about opioid addiction. We need to do more. I witnessed it practicing as a pharmacist. I saw it firsthand. I saw it destroy families. I saw it destroy careers. We do need to address, but what we're talking about here is fentanyl poisoning. I was at a town hall meeting, and I made a mistake. And as a pharmacist, I made a mistake. I called it fentanyl addiction. And a mother jumped up and she said, "Sir, you were wrong. It's not fentanyl addiction, it's fentanyl poisoning." She said, "My son took 1 pill and he's dead." She was right and I was wrong. It is not opioid addiction, it is fentanyl poisoning. Mr. Archer, one of the things that I think that we can do, and we got, there are 2 solutions to this problem. First of all, we got to secure this border and stop these drugs from coming across the border. That's the first thing we got to do. We got a big problem with the amount of drugs that are in this country already. And one of the things that we've got to do, I tell you, in my backpack, I carry naloxone. I carry it everywhere I go. Thank God I've never had to use it, and I pray to God I don't have to use it. But we need to make sure naloxone is available over the counter. It needs to be in every medicine cabinet in America. It needs to be like syrup of Ipecac. It needs to be there. And I call on this committee. We need to have the FDA, and look, I'm a big critic of the FDA a lot of times, but I got to give credit where credit's due. They've already started the packaging to make this OTC. And now they're waiting on the pharmaceutical manufacturers to catch up with them. We need to be encouraging them. We need to have this. Mr. Archer, have you witnessed this?
We have, and I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, look, folks, 200 people every day. 200 people every day. If you put 200 people every day in an airplane and crashed it, we'd all be walking. They'd stop it immediately. And what are we doing? We're sitting here arguing about whether it's at point of entry or whether it's a humanitarian crisis or what. It's drugs coming across the border. We're not talking rocket science here, folks. We got to secure the border, and we got to treat these people. We need to have this in every medicine cabinet, every emergency box. It needs to be like defibrillators, where you got them, you need to have Narcan, naloxone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.